like he had a creative knack, like a nuance, like an understanding of storytelling, of character that honestly, for WWE between 2013 and 2023, it's like Bray's operating as like this like A++ mind in like a school sense, and WWE throughout that time are offering like D, F creative. Like he almost was a fish out of water in that regard, and he was so unique. What he provided, I mean, we discussed the Fiend, we discussed all these different things, the Wyatt family itself, all these different personas of Wyatt, all these things that many of them connected with the audiences. That was great. But I mean, beneath it all was Wyndham, the person, wanting to express a character and express a version of him and express and do these stories that were just, I mean, they were too big, they were too nuanced for WWE. There were too many nuances, which, as I've discussed in videos I've made, I've discussed this on Elite Heat, you've chimed in on this as well. If you write down a Wyndham Rotunda like brainstorm, and you like it's like a notebook, and it's like page after page of his ideas and what he wants to do with the character and all this, I have no doubt that's probably the best thing you've ever read. It would probably be like a masterpiece of like wrestling writing, just writing generally. But translating that, Kevin, to a WWE TV show with politics, with Goldberg not wanting to wrestle a match more than 5 minutes, with The Fiend, with Hell in a Cell in Sacramento, with we want to have the world title match 6 weeks after you come back, with all this stuff, it muddles up what was, in other words, like beautiful waters, I guess, if that makes sense. Like Wyndham Rotunda's creative mind is like a clear, beautiful stream, water's flowing, beautiful water, but then the politics, the, superstars not wanting to do the job, world title matches that shouldn't be happening, egos. That's like throwing sticks and jellyfish and a bit of food coloring and some dirt in the water. And what you're left with, Kevin, is 2023 and Bray Wyatt. It's murky. It's a bit confusing. It's hard to understand. There's some good stuff there, but there's a lot of confusion. There's a bit of like, what's going on? That's the best way I can describe it. That's the legacy of Bray Wyatt to me. It's a clear stream, a brilliant talent, a generational creative mind that gets murky, that gets muddled by the sort of, I guess we'll say the BS of wrestling, the reality of wrestling, all the stuff that goes into it. I think he would have been better in Hollywood. I just do. I think in a director role, in a creative producer role, he would have produced for the biggest movies of this millennium. If in a Hollywood directing role, his mind was unbelievable. So that's my stance, Kevin, on his legacy. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I could have said it better myself, honestly. I could see him doing horror movies, some Netflix horror movies, or big screen, big budget, big theater horror movies. I think that would have been a good thing for him. Yeah, I mean, when I look at Bray Wyatt, when you tell me, okay, what's Bray Wyatt's legacy? For me, it's like this, okay? So Bray Wyatt is a guy that was a victim of the Vince McMahon mentality of like, oh, we have to live on the Attitude Era. We got to live on the late 90s. We got to live on the back of these big stars and part-timers. Bray Wyatt always bottomed out to the big stars. He was never chosen over Cena, Undertaker, Goldberg, Brock Lesnar, even AJ Styles, even a guy like that, Bray Wyatt always just was like second fiddle, It was almost like used against him that he was a homegrown star from this day and age, He didn't have like either of the two things that WWE was looking for at the time when he was a big star from 2013 to 2020. Basically, he didn't have the indie cred that WWE wanted. He didn't have the star power from the 80s and 90s and early 2000s that WWE wanted. So he was just kind of out of the shuffle,
Yeah.
I think if you put Bray Wyatt in another era, you put him in the 80s, let's say you put him in the late 80s, right? Bray Wyatt's one of the biggest stars in wrestling, bar none, at that time. Like, Bray Wyatt would have been a name that we would look back at, like we look at Mr. Perfect or Macho Man or Rick Rude from that era, and that's kind of what he is to this era, really. He's that second tier with the like a Mr. Perfect, like a Razor Ramon, like a guy like that, from the early 2000s. You look at like a Shelton Benjamin,
Yeah.
That's like what Bray Wyatt is, But in the 80s, I think he would have been a big star. He would have been on Hogan's level. Him and Hogan and Bray Wyatt could have drawn a ton of money in the 80s and 90s. He would have been one of those guys that's marching down to the ring and take the leg drop, pal. And the whole arena would have been sold out, So, just one of the most creative minds, one of the most unique characters, one of the most over the top, and one of the best characters I've ever seen grace my screen on a wrestling show.
Have you seen or heard what Vince Russo says about Bray Wyatt?
No.
It basically says if that guy was, if it's 1995, 1996, 97, 98, I'm writing the show, that is one of the biggest stars in the world.
I can see it.
I have no doubt about it. I think, and what you're alluding to there, like Bray was almost a victim of the environment. You say Vince McMahon, but like the climate of WWE, the creative, no one there, no writer getting it. I think someone like Russo, he gets maligned. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff with like Russo, but something like Wyndham. Imagine just them sitting in a room for 2 hours. They craft some of the best stories ever in wrestling, and they produce them and they execute it accordingly. And like they get it. I just feel like no one or hardly anyone besides Wyndham himself understood his vision, and that's ultimately what sort of led to what we got, where it was almost moments. It was some cool stuff, but then a month later, it's like what was that? Why have they done that after they've and that sort of became Bray Wyatt. A career of, to me, what could have been. I look at Wyatt, he's really the main example in the modern era. I look at like Dean Ambrose as well. Someone like that. You talk about like waste, like this great talent, and it's become in WWE for Dean Ambrose, it was, he's going to spray barbecue sauce. He's crazy. He's going to put the tongs on your balls, pal. It's like, who thinks of this?
He's crazy.
He's crazy, pal. Ooh.
Yeah. Come on. All right, so we'll close with this.
Yeah.
I just want to say this to Bray Wyatt, about Bray Wyatt, not to Bray Wyatt, about Bray Wyatt. One of the guys that I'll never forget, and as a wrestling fan, he'll live on forever in all of our hearts. He made a lasting impact on this business forever. And some of that stuff that's going to live on forever is infamous, and a lot of it's good. Some of it's infamous, but he's still going to live on. He's still going to be forever in our hearts as wrestling fans. It's kind of somber. It's kind of a sour note that we have to do this. Not have to do this, like you said, but that we are here talking about Bray Wyatt the way that we are. Never thought we would so early, I thought Bray Wyatt would be one of those guys that I'd be watching in 20 years, doing shoot interviews, talking about what it was like dealing with Roman Reigns backstage or Samoa Joe or something like that. That was like, I just thought he would be such a great storyteller. I think he'd be one of the best shoot interview guys in the history of that business.
Yeah.
I can't picture a guy like telling better stories of Bray Wyatt. And it's unfortunate that we're not going to get to hear those backstage stories. So